And John's father never saw him play rugby either. Never saw him play a game of rugby. He was busy doing things on the farm. So his father died at the end of 44, and soon after that, I think, because his mother was still on the farm and there with her brother-in-law, the farm wasn't going to carry on, so they sold up and moved into town. 1944 to 49, at the ages of 20 to 23, school teachers then were required to do years of country service. So John taught at a number of schools at Te Parita and Hakataumea and Cattle Creek and other places in those years doing his country service in the schools. At the same time as this, he was also doing papers at university, and there was no extramural study at university at that point. But basically what John did is he enrolled in these courses, a couple a year, and he got hold of the textbooks and he studied exam papers, and he didn't go to a single lecture or have anything to do with the staff. He just found out what the exam was and turned up, and having studied the book, passed the exam. So he nibbled away at several university courses by sort of surreptitious extramural study. And then moved to Christchurch in 1950. So 1950 and 51, he came to Christchurch. He got a job at Christchurch East, and he enrolled at university and did more of his study. This was also the sort of heyday of his rugby playing career as well. He had been a little bit in the back blocks in those other years when he was possibly at his peak. But you just play where you are there. So he played for North Otago, and he played for Captain Mid Canterbury, and he played for South Canterbury. He played for 5 different unions in the end. But by the time he got to Christchurch, he was ready to play for Canterbury, and they were very pleased to have him. So he was a regular feature in the Canterbury rugby team. In 1952, end of 51, he finished his BA, graduated with a BA. And in 52, he thought he was going to do his master's studies, so he started doing his master's papers in 52 and then his thesis in 53. He couldn't do this at the same time as teaching. He did actually have to turn up to start for this. And so he did a bit of taxi driving as well to supplement things. And this was also a time with his rugby, when his rugby was really taking off. In 1954, he was made a temporary lecturer after finishing his master's degree, made a temporary lecturer at Canterbury, and he met Dell in Easter of 1954. I noticed when you were sitting here enjoying watching him, and I was trying to gather my thoughts out the back for this, that he talked a little bit in that clip about how he met Dell. But they basically met because Dell's father, who was the owner of the Marine and later the Provincial Hotel, had promised that if the Marist rugby team, which was John's club, had won the competition, then he would shout them all to come and stay in the pub, which they did. And the rest, as they say, is history. Except that John wasn't quite what Grandad Woodley had in mind for his daughter. He wanted somebody like him, who was, given to the grandiose gestures, like, having the whole rugby team come and stay at his pub, and this kind of thing, which wasn't really John's style, and he was a teacher. He was Grandad was not his style at all. But he kind of, he went along with it anyway, and soon after, they met in Easter 54, they got engaged in February 55, and married in August 55, and a week later set sail on the Rangatane to go and take up a PhD scholarship position that John had won at Ohio State University through the Fulbright Foundation. this was the end of his rugby playing career. It was the year after he I suppose his biggest achievement was being part of the Canterbury team that won the Ranfurly Shield in 1954. Prior to that, John was actually one of the older people in the squad, in his late 20s, which was old for rugby players back then, and the Canterbury team was doing a northern tour of playing Hawke's Bay and Northland and a couple of other provinces, and John was a late addition to the squad, but he ended up sort of forcing his way in and playing most of the games. It was expected that he might be an emergency. And in those days, emergency in rugby really was. You didn't bring people on because somebody else was a bit puffed, or you wanted an impact player. You left the field by stretcher only, and then the emergency would replace you. But anyway, he did pretty well on that. He must have done well enough because he was then picked for the team to challenge for the Ranfurly Shield, and they won it. Interestingly, the All Black team had been announced just a couple of weeks before this time, and the All Black team was packed with people from the Wellington team who were subsequently beaten by Canterbury for the Shield. Anyway, so 55, Dell and John took off to Ohio State University, and partway through then, older sister Jenny was born, which was kind of the last thing they needed in that situation of not really having enough money to make ends meet. There was enough scholarship basically for one person, I think, for 1 year, and they eked it out for two people and subsequently another little one, and managed to get other bits and pieces of work and get through there. John actually really put his nose down and finished that PhD. He didn't start until September of 1955, and by that little bit of the year and 2 other years, he had finished his PhD and they were heading back to New Zealand. So he finished it all in 2 years and a bit, just working morning, noon and night through summer breaks and all the rest of it. So they got back to New Zealand in 58. John was appointed to Canterbury on his return to Christchurch, and then the rest of us sort of arrived along the way. John was born in 58, and then me in 60, and Jim in 62, Peter in 63, Martin in 65, and Simon in 1970. Sorry, 1966. I got the 65 mixed up with the move to Hawkesbury. So we lived in a little place in Oxley Ave, and then in 1965 we moved to Hawkesbury Ave, a big place in St Albans, soon after that, by the mid-1960s, things started changing. One of the things that changed quite a lot, or the sort of catalyst for change, was that Dell started reading. I said John had grown up in a house where he was read to all the time, and he constantly sought out books. Dell was raised in an anti-intellectual, book-free household. And it wasn't until 1967 that she started reading, and the funny thing about reading is that you can kind of expose yourself to interesting and different ideas that you wouldn't otherwise get. At the same time, they developed a strong association and friendship with a radical priest by the name of Father John Curnow. And with that reading and those contacts and his interests, it all sort of started this cauldron of sort of introduction to radical social and political ideas. The 1960s there were big radical things going on at the time, and Dell and John got exposed to them, and they were unlikely progressives really. John came from old school Canterbury conservative farming stock. Dell came from urban anti-intellectual, right-wing white trash. But they were interested in new ideas. They got involved with the Christian family movement. They got involved with the Laity Commission. They represented the Catholic Church, New Zealand Catholic Church at the Vatican in Rome in 1967. And part of that whole project was that this was not just a religious thing, but that theological approach gave Catholics like that a sense of obligation to engage in broader social activities as well. So John got involved in all sorts of other social activism. He was involved in No Māoris, No Tour and the Heart anti-apartheid movement, which was not exactly straightforward in terms of his relationships with his former rugby mates, but it was important for him, and he was steadfast about that, and it was something that that we all kind of learned from and observed taking place.